I have a sake here, but I don't have it open. So
I'm not in a position to drink right now.
Okay, it's fine. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 43 of Sugidama Podcast, the podcast about Japanese sake, one of the most sociable drinks which helps people meet again and again. And today, I'm meeting Tim and John from Sake Revolution, the first American sake podcast. And I'm meeting them again because a few months ago, I was a guest of Sake Revolution myself. But before I introduce my guests properly, let me tell you about our sponsor, London Sake, who has one of the widest selections of premium and craft sake available online today. You can choose from over 100 sake from 25 breweries, and they will deliver across the UK and many European markets. And if you don't know what sake to choose, you can use simple online tasting notes together with very sensible and affordable food pairings to help you decide. What's more, you can get a 10% discount by just using the code SUGIDAMA, all caps, during checkout. London Sake, making sake simple. My name is Alex, and I live in London. I am certified sake specialist, sake judge, sake educator, and sake advocate. Besides this podcast, I have Sugidama blog, where I write about all things sake, and publish tasting notes, overviews, and information about sake events happening in London. So if you are into sake and listen to various podcasts about the drink, as I do, all of which are great in their own way, you must know Timothy Sullivan and John Puma and their amazing Sake Revolution podcast. Tim is a sake samurai, which is one of the most honorable titles you can get for your contribution to the sake. He is also a founder of the Urban Sake website, a great resource about the drink for both sake professionals and enthusiasts. John Puma is the co-creator of thesakenotes.com and probably New York's biggest sake geek. I love their podcast because it's fun, but also it's very educational and gives you a lot of information about various sake. So without further delay, let's listen to our conversation with Tim and John about the sake scene in the US and in New York in particular.
Please welcome our guest.
Hello guys, very nice to see you and hear you. How are you?
Doing well.
hey there, doing good.
Great. It's great to have you on podcast and have an opportunity to chat with you about sake scene in the US and New York. But let's start with small introduction because I'm sure people know about you. I'm sure because I was listening to your recent episode and John was talking about going to this Eureka bar. And then next one in the queue was Unplugged episode when they say, oh yeah, we met John Puma there. So you guys, probably everybody knows about you. But if you can do like a brief introduction, who you are, what do you do in sake, and why sake?
Tim, you want to go first?
Sure. So my name is Timothy Sullivan. I'm a sake educator, and I'm also a sake podcaster. And I've been working in sake for about 15 years, and I'm also a brand ambassador for Hakkaisan Sake Brewery.
Great. My name is John Puma. I am an industry outsider. I think I'm an enthusiastic amateur. That's what we're gonna call it. You know, I am a big fan of sake in the Dan Carlin fan of history kind of way, and whenever I get into something, I really get into it with both feet, and I fell in love with sake, so I had to give back. I had to find ways to do that, and one of those was to get into a podcast with Mr. Sullivan here, Sake Revolution, and it's been a fun couple of years making that show.
Yeah, it's a great show. I'm a big fan of your show, right? listen to all episodes. Looking forward to each new episode. Like your interaction and how you present stuff. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Let's start with the alcohol scene in the US, because US is a bit different country from other countries. I mean, in Britain, it doesn't really matter where you are in Britain. You can do whatever you like. You can sell sake from Birmingham to Edinburgh, for example, or I don't know. It's pretty much the same regulations and things like that. I guess same in many other countries. But in the US, it's very different from state to state. And how does it work?
Well, the high view on this one is basically that every state could potentially have its own laws governing the sale of alcohol, with certain exceptions. So I think like the legal age is consistent throughout the entire country, but things like when you're allowed to sell alcohol, what kinds of alcohol you can sell on, and in what kind of places, that sort of thing really can vary. And that makes things a little bit weird sometimes, a little bit interesting, because you'll go someplace and be like, oh, you go to another state and try to buy alcohol on like a Sunday, and you just can't. It's just not legal. And that can also vary by county. It's very weird, very specific. Although I think that given his position within the industry, Tim might have some more color on that.
Well, it is almost like the United States is made up of 50 different countries. Every state, every federal state, as you said, John, has its own alcohol laws and regulations. And just one quick example, in New York State, the sale of alcohol, except for beer, is not allowed in grocery stores. So if you go to a grocery store in New York State, they have tons of beer for sale, but you can't buy wine, sake, or hard liquor. You have to go to a designated liquor store in New York State. Mm-hmm. And in New York State, there's rules where you can only get 2 licenses for liquor stores. So you can't have a chain of 50 liquor stores. So very quirky. And then if you go to California, you get off the plane, you go into a grocery store, and there are aisles and aisles of wine and sake and hard liquor. And it's quite a culture shock in the same country to go from state to state. And there's some counties in other states that don't allow the sale of alcohol at all. They're called dry counties. And it's just mind-boggling, the variation that the laws have around the sale of alcohol. And as someone who sells alcohol for a living, it's very frustrating when you travel across the country.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's probably a huge headache if you want to set up a business selling alcohol. So if you've got, for example, online store, can you sell across the whole country, or you still have to? How does
that
it work?
Also varies by state. So every state has their own rules about people selling alcohol over state lines and shipping it in. And I want to say that a lot of them allow it. There's only a handful, I think, that don't allow it. Tim, you correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, there's a large online retailer in the US called Tipsy Sake. I work with them a lot, and they currently sell to, I think, 45 out of 50 states. And they've done a lot of work behind the scenes to figure out, jump through the hoops, jump over the hurdles, and figure out the regulations around shipping alcohol to various states. And they're in California, so they have to do it from that point of view. Okay. But it was one of the biggest challenges, I think, for starting their online business, was figuring out those hurdles.
Okay, yeah, it's quite an endeavor if you want to start selling sake.
It's weird. It's a really weird country, Alex.
Wow.
We love it here, but it's a weird country.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about sake in this weird country. So I think it's the largest export market of sake for Japan. I think it's bigger than China and bigger than Hong Kong or Singapore.
For now.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. So why do you think so? Why do you think United States is the biggest market for sake?
Well, I think that one reason is that there's a huge number of people here. There's just a lot of people in the
You got a
US.
lot of bodies.
Over 300 million people. And another thing I think is interesting is that, I've tried to sell sake in France, I've tried to sell sake in Germany, and these countries have very deep and long-standing alcohol traditions in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Germany has a long-standing beer culture, and it's a little hard to break into that with consumers' preferences. But in the US, it's a big melting pot of cultures. And I think that people are willing to try other alcohols. For example, on Cinco de Mayo, which is a Mexican holiday, everyone goes out and has Mexican food and drinks tequila. And on St. Patrick's Day, everyone becomes Irish, and we all have corned beef and cabbage, and we drink green beer. And I think the U.S. is very open to exploring other cultures and being part of that melting pot mentality, and that makes it a little easier to introduce sake. And I think that that's helped grow the market here.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think I couldn't have put that better myself. That's awesome.
Have you noticed the growth in sake in the US in recent years? Because it was huge growth in the UK, definitely. I remember when I got interested in sake, probably like 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was only one place where you could basically buy sake, and the range wasn't that great. And now you've got several shops, you've got in London at least, and outside London, you've got sake bars, you've got restaurants, non-Japanese restaurants serving sake, you've got several online retailers selling sake and dedicated to sake. So it's huge growth. How it was in the States?
Very similar. It's been, I've been consuming sake here in the US since 2006. And I want to say that the sake, like just the variety that's available to us here in New York, has probably doubled or tripled since then. And a lot more places carry it. There's a lot more options for getting it. There's also, as Tim mentioned earlier, the online retail option that just didn't exist. I guess one another fun thing to kind of jump back to for a moment on how things are different between the states is that the selections actually vary on state. So you may have a situation where a sake from a particular brewer is available in California, but not available in New York, or maybe certain bottles from that brewer are available in New York and not in California. With the magic of mail order, I can, as a New Yorker, obtain sake that's only available in California, even though I'm all the way on the other side of the country and they don't sell that sake here. It's not that they're not, allowed to give it to me here. It's just that the retailers here just don't have it. Mm-hmm. It's not part of their selection. So yeah, we've definitely seen a bit of an explosion in the varieties that are available and the options as far as purchasing goes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think John and I have personally contributed to a lot of the growth in the market because we've been drinking so much over the past 15 years. But it's been really astounding to see the change in the variety of sakes you can get. I remember 15 years ago when I was getting started, I really had to go to the back corner of the liquor store and dust off the bottles and see what they had, if anything was drinkable. And now more and more liquor stores are discovering that consumers are really interested in premium sake. And I've been more and more happy with the selection that I find when I walk into a random liquor store here in New York. And I think it's been a real positive change of growth in the market.
Okay. Is there a difference between states in terms of sake availability? Are there states with wider ranges of sake and some
Absolutely.
states? So in your opinion, what is the top states in terms of sake?
New York. Yeah, I think that New York and California are your two big, the two biggest states as far as variety goes. I think it's not a coincidence that those are the biggest states as far as sales go too. So, the place where the sake consumers are, they're going to add more variety to that market. And so, yeah, we have a lot of options here in New York. As Tim pointed out, it's probably because he and I are just ordering so much of it. They need to keep filling those shelves with new stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real connection as well between Japanese food and Japanese sake. And the New York City market, the LA market, San Francisco market, there's a lot of high-end Japanese restaurants that are selling $400 a person omakases, $500 a person sushi omakases. And with restaurants like that, they need a steady supply of ultra premium sakes to go along with that. So as the restaurant markets, the Japanese food restaurant markets mature and grow, there's an ever increasing demand for sakes to go along with that. So I've always seen sake as kind of the caboose of this trend for sushi and Japanese food. And as that expands and grows, sushi is going to lead the way in many ways for sake to get a foothold in new markets around the country.
Okay, yeah. So it takes us to the next question. What are the main channels for people to get sake? Do people mostly drink their sake at restaurants, or they buy, or there are bars where you can drink sake? Because if you take London again, just for comparison, before 2019, we didn't have any sake bar in London. So most of the cases you have to either go to restaurant or buy sake from retailer and drink at home, for example. How is it in New York?
Well, I think that most people are going to have their first positive experience with premium sake in a restaurant. And most of the time, it's going to be a Japanese sushi restaurant. That happened to me 15 years ago. That's where I had my first experience. And I think that's true for a lot of consumers. What I've been noticing more and more is that, especially younger people, the millennials and Generation Z, they bring sake home more often than people who feel you have to pair sake and sushi in a restaurant only. Younger people, I feel, are more willing to bring sake home, get it at their grocery store if they're in California, or get it at the liquor store, and enjoy that at home with all kinds of food. So I'm noticing a trend with younger consumers, a little bit more freedom and a little bit more acceptance of sake.
Yeah.
Do you think that I heard these opinions a few times already, that the younger generation who were brought up on Japanese manga, anime, and this kind of inflow on Japanese culture, they more interested in Japanese food and Japanese drinks and sake, and they one of the drivers of the sake demand. Do you think it's true or it's exaggerated? What is your opinion?
I'm like living proof of that. So I was a little bit on board early with the anime stuff and video games that were being imported from Japan and things like that. And that was a major driver for my interest in Japanese culture and Japanese stuff, which eventually led to going to Japan and then getting introduced to sake. So, definitely like having those situations where you are already exposed to the culture and you have an interest in the culture. Japanese sake is culture in a bottle. So you're really, it's opening the door for you to have that experience. And then once you do, the sake kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, my personal experience was very different. I had no exposure to Japan at all before I discovered sake. So I discovered sake as a culinary item in a restaurant. I love sushi, but I also loved Mexican food and all kinds of things. But when I discovered sake, something just clicked for me. And I learned about Japanese culture after discovering sake. So I think both paths are valid and common, but the growth of interest in manga, anime is really astounding. And you can just visit any anime convention or any manga gathering to see the depths of the devotion that people really have for this side of Japanese culture. And I think it's only a good thing. I think it's going to bring more attention to Japanese food and Japanese sake. So I'm all for it. I think it's fantastic.
And in terms of restaurants, do you see sake in non-Japanese restaurants?
I see it occasionally, but it's still kind of rare. I would love to see it become normalized. That would be, I think that's the secret that's the secret sauce. That's what everybody wants. Like once we get it into regular restaurants and people start seeing it as just a beverage that can go with anything, then I think that the demand will increase even further from that point on.
In New York, I often see sake in other types of Asian restaurants. Like when I go out for Thai food, my local Thai restaurant has a small sake selection. And some Chinese restaurants I've been to have a few types of sake. So I think that there's a demand from consumers asking for sake at different types of Asian restaurants. When you get outside of the Asian genre, I think it's a little more rare. But one place where I do see it is at high-end restaurants that have big wine lists. Sometimes they'll have a cider section, a beer section, and a few kinds of sake as well. It's just a drop in the bucket, but it's a really great thing to see because I think those types of high-end restaurants really lead the way in a lot of things. So we're beginning to see it, but we want more. We want more of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you talk to people who import sake here, and I think they very often talk about that. They often talk about that, yeah, we need to get sake into, I don't know, French restaurants, Italian restaurants. And they succeed to a certain extent. You can now find in certain restaurants sake, which are not Japanese, like Italian, as I said, French, and obviously Asian restaurants, Chinese restaurants, and Thai restaurants. It's probably... I mean, I don't see the big difference between China and France in terms of sake, because, come on, it's completely different, alcoholic drink cultures. But I think from consumer point of view, it's probably more normal to see sake in Asian restaurants than in European one. I guess so. But yeah, it's. I hope all this kind of prejudice will go away and we'll see more sake in non-Japanese restaurants.
Yeah. Whenever I go into a restaurant and I do see cider on the menu, I'm like, if they can have cider along with their wine and beer, they can have sake.
Exactly.
Like this is a prime. Like if the person putting together the menu was open to 7 different kinds of cider, then I think we can talk them into a delicious sake or two. That's my yardstick that I use to measure.
Yeah. So, what about bar culture, sake bar culture? Because I remember you guys were talking about this sake bar, which was even featured in some series. I don't remember. They were shooting some scene in this bar, which actually happening in Tokyo, but it was shot in New York. So, do you have many bars which focus on sake?
I don't want to say we have many, but the ones that we have are fantastic. I think that most of the places here that have sake are a little bit more in the izakaya realm. So the idea of the Japanese pub, which is a lot more of like how you would consume sake in Japan. There's not a lot of sake bars. It's izakayas really, and so it's a little bit similar here. We do have, as you mentioned, you were pointing out sake bar Decibel, which is a legendary location here in New York. It's been around for 25 plus years, I think, at this point. Is that right, Tim? Yep.
Yeah,
and more recently, Accidental Bar, which is actually one of the things I really like about Accidental Bar is that it has no Japanese trimmings to it. It is not. When you walk in, there's nothing that's going to tell you this is in any way tied to an Asian culture. They just happen to only have sake, and beer. Yeah, but it happens to be a sake bar, but there's nothing about it that says like, oh, this is some kind of exotic Japanese thing. It's just a bar that happens to have sake. And that's one of the really cool things about it. And I think that's one of the things that makes that particular bar great for new people. They come in not really knowing what they're getting into. It's just a bar in this neighborhood, and then they're all of a sudden they're going to experience sake.
Okay, before we continue our conversation about Japanese sake in the US, let me remind you about London Sake, our sponsor, and their huge selection of curated sake sets which provide a great opportunity to explore various styles and types of sake. Have a look, but don't forget about the magic word Sugidama, all caps, to get your 10% discount. So, what is it about the awareness of people about sake? I mean, the general consumer, do they know what sake is, or it's still quite exotic thing?
I tell this interesting story. When I first started teaching sake, I taught my first class back in 2007. And when I started teaching, I would always ask the class, how many people have never had sake before? And I would have people raise their hand. And usually there would be about 15 or 20% of the people would raise their hand. And, after about 10 years, I stopped asking that question because no one was raising their hand anymore. So sake had reached saturation in American culture, and people knew what it was. People have tried it before. And I thought that was an interesting shift over the course of like 7 or 8 years, that I couldn't find anybody who had never had sake before. People paying money to come to a sake class or a sake pairing dinner or a sake tasting, they usually have a level of interest and are starting to get into it. And that's really exciting when you get those customers in front of you for a class or a tasting. I really love that.
Yeah. So if you, for example, somebody asks you, so what do you do? And you say, I'm sake educator. Do people understand it straight away? Oh, yeah, sake, I know that. Or they say, what?
Okay, this is how the conversation goes. I'm at a party and they say, oh, Tim, nice to meet you. What do you do? And I say, oh, I'm a sake sommelier and a sake educator. Oh my God, I love sake. And then the questions start. What's the best sushi restaurant? Where should I get sake? What brands do you recommend? I tried this one in a green bottle. What do you think about the one in the green bottle?
Yeah.
And
the one in the green bottle. Love that.
Yeah, the one in the green bottle. The questions just start coming. So there's a real enthusiasm for sake. And when I first started, I would say that, and some older people might say, oh, I had sake once in the 60s and it was a very bad trip and I didn't like it. And, that I don't get that reaction anymore at all. So it's very positive and people are very enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, it's so exciting. Yeah. So what do people like? What kind of sake people like? Because
that's a great question.
Tell you, for example, here in Britain, people prefer dry sake. They quite like the dry sake, and I asked several times at some tasting, some people saying, okay, what is your favorite? And more often than not, people say, oh yeah, this one. And it was like a dry, sort of like probably Honjozo or Junmai, but things like that. Or people obviously say, if it was, even with Junmai Daiginjo, people sometimes prefer drier type of Honjozo. And how is it in the States?
Well, there's two kinds of sake that I've seen in my practice that have been popular over the more recent years. One, I think we cannot escape the gravitational pull of, is nigori, cloudy sake. Every time I go to an event or host a dinner, there's always a few consumers that come up and say, oh, I love the unfiltered or cloudy one or whatever they call it. And I get that question every single time. So I know there's a level of interest in cloudy sake nigori that you just can't escape. So that's one for sure. And the other one, when you pour a variety of styles for people, Americans and New Yorkers I've seen react very positively to nama genshu as well. So those big, juicy, unpasteurized sakes that are a little higher in alcohol, they tend to be quite fruity and juicy, very impactful, and very, very flavorful. And I think the super clean sakes that you described, like the dry Junmai styles, that's a personal favorite of mine. But it's a very subtle for the American palate, I think. And the juicy, unpasteurized, huge sakes are just like, wow. The reason I think it's popular is because the flavor is right there and it's very accessible for people. If they've never tried a premium sake, they sip on a Namagenshu, they're like, boom, I get it. The light bulb goes off and the flavor is right there. When you study a quiet Junmai that's light and clean, it may be a little bit too subtle if people are used to drinking high acid wines or super bitter beers, triple IPAs or whatever. So Namagenshu has the boldness to stand up to other common flavors in the American genre, I think. What do you think, John?
I think I've seen a change over the years as well. When I was first getting into sake, those light, clean, fruity, a little bit of dry was very popular. It was gaining in popularity. Like brands like Dasai were becoming really big. And over time, and I think it's also over availability as more of those big juicy namas became available here, because that's also something that's changed over the years. Is a lot more accessibility of unpasteurized sake. Like it's like something that no one, when somebody gets introduced to it, it's like something they've never tasted before, and that's exciting, and they remember it and they want to have that again. It's big and bold and fun, and that's something that they begin to associate sake with.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because Nigori has never been big thing here, because I was asking, because I remember I was listening to, reading somewhere that Nigori became very popular because it went very well with sushi. Like Nigori is slightly sweeter, at least Nigori that sold outside Japan, and sushi salty, and people like this combination. But when I ask people here, people say, no, we've never noticed that people like Nigori. It's something that, so it's quite interesting, and Namagenshu is interesting again, because it's different from, I guess, from Europe.
I think for the Nigori question, a lot of Americans have a sweet tooth, and I think that Nigori is sweet. And again, it's an unmistakable flavor. You can't sip on a super cloudy Nigori and think, oh, I love the subtlety of this. It's so nuanced and late. No. It's boom, it's rich, it's sweet, it's in your face. And again, it's easy, approachable style. I don't think Nigori pairs especially well with sushi, but the style that's popular in the US, I think, is sweeter, a little richer, and there's a fondness for sweet flavors, I think, in some sections of the consumer base in the US.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. How taste differs from country to country, obviously. And it's quite interesting to see how it works. So US probably, I don't know, but my guess, probably the biggest producer of sake outside Japan. At least it's very big, because there are so many breweries now. You hear about new breweries opened in that state, or new breweries opened in that state. Let's talk about local sake. I think New York it's got like Brooklyn Kura, right? Mm-hmm. And are there any other breweries in New York?
Yes, there's a very small one in Bushwick, Brooklyn, called Kato Sake Works.
Oh yeah. How do you think the American sake differs from Japanese sake?
Ooh, that's a big one. That's a big question. I think that American breweries, obviously, for the most part, are much, much, much smaller. And they have a lot of challenges when it comes to obtaining not just equipment for brewing, but also raw materials. Rice availability, for starters, yeast availability is very different here in the States than it is in Japan. But in a relatively short span of time, I think that we've seen the quality of a lot of the sake here improve in leaps and bounds, a lot faster than I think a lot of us were expecting.
Yeah, I think that the market for U.S. breweries, the quality of their products, took a big turn for the better when rice farmers in the U.S. began growing premium sake rice, Yamada Nishiki, Gohyakuman Goku, and now they're making omachi, and it's all grown domestically here in the U.S. And I used to not be a huge fan of U.S.-made sake when I first started drinking, but as more and more domestic U.S. breweries are getting their hands on these premium Japanese style sake rices, it leads to a big increase in quality. And the skill level of the brewers is also increasing greatly over time. So the quality has gone up markedly in the years that I've been drinking sake. And I think that encourages the domestic market. And as more people discover sake, we're going to have more brewers opening up. So it's a wonderful cycle that I think is going to grow this domestic market as well. But there are, as John mentioned, there are challenges: getting equipment, getting access to the yeasts, finding skilled brewers. It's all a challenge. So it's not an easy path. It's not a way to quick riches by any stretch. So all the brewers you meet in the US, they're all super passionate about sake. So they're kindred spirits to us for sure.
So have you noticed the difference in taste profile and, I don't know, type of sake that US breweries make compared to, let's say, Japan?
I think that one major thing is that the Japanese brewers have lots of regulations and rules about ingredients and milling rates and all types of things. So the regulations are stricter in Japan, generally speaking. I found that US brewers like Brooklyn Kura, for example, are free to experiment with mixing in hops or different types of brewing styles, flavor profiles, cider collabs, beer collabs, wine collabs, and they try all these fun, interesting things and break the mold of what sake is supposed to be from a Japanese point of view. So that's exciting and interesting. Lots of new flavors, but they also brew traditional, clean styles very beautifully. So I think if you show your skill in that area and then you try wild and crazy things as well, that's the best of both worlds.
John, you brought some Brooklyn Kura sake to Japan.
Yes, quite a few bottles actually.
Yeah. So how did people react?
Well, we only had a handful of situations where people opened the bottles, in our presence and sipped on them. In all cases, they were really happy about them. We brought an unpasteurized Brooklyn Kura number 14. That's their flagship Junmai Ginjo with us, and we kept that cool the entire time and gave that to a bar that we're very friendly with in Hiroshima. And manager opened it up. He had a sip, poured us a couple of sips. We were very happy to see that it traveled well, which was good. And he really liked it. He gave his thoughts on it. And other people at the bar were very curious, so he started pouring for everybody at the bar. And before you know it, they're like, "This is made in America? Like what?" Like they were shocked. And so that's kind of what you want to hear. I think you want to go in there and have them be like stunned that this is actually made outside of Japan. We also had a really great experience with the Occidental series, which is a dry hopped. Tim mentioned earlier playing with the hops. It's a dry hopped sake that takes on a bit of a pink color, has a bit of like a grapefruity kind of flavor, a little more grapefruit forward. And that was very popular every place that we brought it. A lot of situations like that, again, where people would open it up and share it around, and people were really excited about it. They know about hopped sake in Japan. It's just that they don't do it a lot because there's the rules and whatnot. They can't call it sake at that point, or they can't call it nihonshu at that point. But yeah, it was popular, and we were really got a little nervous when we were seeing them open it up and seeing them taste it, but they were really excited about it and really had positive things to say.
Yeah, the thing about sake made outside Japan, the great thing about it, that obviously people don't have to follow the strict rules of Japanese tax authorities and make sake according to these rules. They can experiment, they can use different brewing methods, different yeasts and different ryes, and even add something to sake which you probably can't add in Japan in most cases, unless you trying to sell it as a non-sake or something different. And as I understand, if you like a sake brewery in Wisconsin, for example, I don't know, you find it probably difficult to sell across the country. You will probably have to focus on your own state and probably try to, if you want to expand, you will have to go to each state and get some kind of permission license to sell it there, right?
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, you'd have to probably increase the size of your brewery because a lot of these operations are very small. We mentioned earlier, Kato Sake works in Bushwick. He sells his sake generally to like the small neighborhood that's around him, and he goes through everything that he makes. So he doesn't really have the opportunity to sell outside of his immediate vicinity, but his sake is very popular to those people. Another example like that is Arizona sake, which is has a very good reputation, but is really difficult to find outside of Arizona. In Arizona, you can go to like a Whole Foods and it's there, but outside of there, it's very, very tricky to get your hands on.
It's probably like it was like in medieval Japan when the breweries were very small and they were probably catering for their neighborhoods rather than the country and something like that.
And there are examples in Japan of that where some breweries will have brands that they really only sell to the local prefecture that they really don't sell outside of the area just because they have a different product that goes outside. This one's for us, that kind of thing.
There are plenty of tiny breweries in Japan, which probably some of them very, very old, but very, very small.
Yeah, and I think a lot of U.S. brewers that make sake have to define for themselves what success is. Some of them have decided, I want to have a tap room. I want to serve my state and my local area. I want people to come in and see us making sake and serve them fresh sake, give them nama unpasteurized. And that's where their ambitions end. And they're very happy with that success, making a beautiful tap room and selling locally or selling in their state. And other breweries have visions beyond their state, and they want to make sake a worldwide beverage and sell all over the country and then even internationally. So there's a wide range of ambitions when it comes to brewers who set up a place to make sake in the US. And I think we're going to see more and more development of these different styles and different sizes of breweries as we move forward. It's interesting to see it develop. And I want to support all different levels of breweries, whether they're just selling locally or they want to take over the world. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. Do you think that it means that it's easier for US brewers to express this terroir concept because they can use probably local rice, they can use, or it's like in Japan when it doesn't really exist. Well, it exists in certain cases, but not like in France, for example, with French wine.
Well, I think that by and large in the United States, everybody's getting their rice from like one of two places. So, you're getting rice from California or Arkansas, really, that people in Arizona are, as far as I'm aware, aren't growing their own rice. It's just the area is just not suited for it. So, I think that the rices are coming from a common place. I think that you may get, it's like the water may, and maybe just like the overall climate may lead to some variations, but I'm not sure if it's going to be so much of a terroir situation. I think it'll be a little similar to how it is in Japan as well.
So any interesting trends or observations about, say, sake in the United States?
I think there are a few interesting trends for sure. There's a big natural wine movement right now in the US. These like really huge, interesting, funky wines that are coming out. And I think a lot of brewers of sake have their eye on that trend. And there are some big, funky, unusual sakes coming out of Japan and being made in the US as well. So I think this natural, quote unquote, natural sake, wild sake trend is something you'll see. Do you think, John, do you see that as well?
I'm definitely seeing a trend with that. It's definitely getting traction. I hear from people a lot who get into these very funky styles, these like aged namas, that kind of thing. And I'm not my style personally, but I think that the nice thing about sake, one of the nice things about sake anyway, is that there's something for everybody. And I'm glad it exists. I'm glad somebody's going to enjoy it.
Okay. So how do you think the sake will develop in the future? What do you think happen? Will we see, I don't know, sake in non-sake restaurants, or we'll see more sake stores, or I don't know, more local sake? What do you think?
Well, I think we're definitely going to see more local sake. I think it's going to keep happening. And I hope that eventually does lead to seeing more sake in contemporary restaurants. That's kind of my dream one day, is to walk into like a gastropub and sit down and right on the tap list, I want to see like some sakes next to all of that. That would be like, that's my dream situation here in New York. I would love to see that happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's lots of room for growth still. And sake makes up a tiny, tiny percentage of the overall alcohol consumption in the US. I think it's something like 0.2% of the alcohol consumed in the US is sake. So there's lots and lots of room for growth. I think it's going to happen at all different levels in all different ways. One thing I try to dispel is that sake is just one thing. There's so many styles of sake, so many ways to produce it, so many ways to distribute it. People ask me, do you hate sake cocktails? Do you love sake cocktails? I'm like, it's fine. It's a multi-prong approach to make sake more widely distributed. Some people are going to fall in love with sake cocktails, some won't. But I'm happy they're out there to spread the word to the people that fall in love with them. So whatever way we can get sake out there more, I'm going to support it. And I think that we're going to see a lot of growth. It's going to be slow and steady, in my opinion.
So at the end of the episode, I usually ask my guests to give some recommendation of sake they like and why they recommend it. Yeah.
So I looked at the list of sakes you've had on the show before, and there was one noticeable absence, and that was from the brand that I represent, Hakkaisan, out of Niigata.
Oh, yeah.
And I am the brand ambassador for them, full disclosure. But one of the reasons I wanted to work with Hakkaisan is because I honestly, truly love their sake. And it's the style of sake that I think is fantastic. So I'm a very real cheerleader for Hakkaisan. I think it's a great brand. One sake that I think you have in the UK is the Hakkaisan Snow-Aged, the 3-year Snow-Aged Junmai Daiginjo. It's in a very striking, solid white bottle with black writing on the label. And this is a sake, it's a Junmai Daiginjo grade, and it's aged for 3 years at freezing temperatures in the snow cellar at our brewery. So it's called a snow-aged style of sake. Wow. The aging lends a sense of richness and umami to the sake, but it's still really clean compared to other aged sakes. So we don't really call it a koshu per se because it's perfectly clear. And that's kind of the miracle of this sake, that the aging lends richness and depth of flavor, but it doesn't caramelize. It doesn't get dark in color. So you get all the benefits of aging without any of that yellowing or darkening of the sake. So it's a wonderful example of what could be called a Niigata style koshu or aged sake. So that's a strong recommendation of mine.
Okay, yeah, it's an excellent recommendation. I think I tried it before at some trade show when it was several breweries, and this sake definitely you remember it because the bottle is distinct, very distinct, yes. And the taste is amazing. So yeah, it's a great recommendation. Thanks a lot. Okay, John, what would you recommend?
Well, since we are talking about sake in America, and we're talking about, we talked a little bit about American sake, I want to recommend an American sake. I want to tell people to try to get their hands on some Brooklyn Kura if they get a chance. Oh. They're my my local yeah. Sake, and I'm a big fan. And I think that would be nice if you can get your way to the States. Try some Brooklyn Kura.
Do you have anything in particular, any kind of brand or
so yeah,
any particular sake they've got?
I would say they're number 14. For me, that's the one that like really, when you're tasting it, it really feels like Japanese sake. It really does. It really feels like something that was made over in Japan, and I think I think they're doing a great job over there, those guys.
Are they sort of sake is just by number?
Sorry?
They a sake is called.
Oh no.
number.
So no, it's actually a little funny. The reason they call that one number 14 is it was like the 14th like batch it was like the recipe of the 14th batch they made.
I see. And
so that one really hit for them, so they decided, all right, we're gonna make that one our flagship, and we're gonna call it number 14. And it worked out really well.
Yeah. It sounds like a very nice number. It's a 7 by 2. Like a
Practice makes perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can see, okay, guys, they really put a lot of effort.
Yeah, they did. They did.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you very much for great conversation. It was very interesting. It was very interesting to find out how things are in the States and what people drink in terms of sake and how they like it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, Alex, it was wonderful. Thank you for having us. And if you get a chance, come on over to New York and we'll show you around in person. We'd love to have you here.
Yeah, definitely we'll try to do that at some point. I will keep listening to your podcast. Yeah, which is great.
Hope so. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm sure Tim does as well.
yeah, exactly. So it's always a pleasure to listen to you guys and enjoy it. Okay, thanks a lot.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.
Right.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for today. I'll be back with more interviews about various sake breweries and sake around the world, as well as a few special episodes, one of which is an interview with Jim Ryan about his excellent Discovering Yamaguchi Sake book, which has been just published. So if you haven't yet ordered it, hurry up. In the meantime, buy a bottle of Hakkaisan sake recommended by Tim, if it's available in your country. I'm not sure if Brooklyn Kura sake is available outside the US, but if you see it, or if you are in New York, grab a bottle. And you can always go to our sponsor, London Sake website, and buy any other sake there. They also used to stock Hakkaisan, so check it out. But if you are still unsure what sake to buy or want to explore more, look up the tasting notes section on my website, sugidama.co.uk. Another thing, I have mentioned in my conversation with Tim and John that sake drinkers in the UK prefer a drier style of sake. And it's based on my experience talking to various people and asking them what they like. But let me know what is your favorite style of sake and what country you are from. I might be wrong about the UK, and I'm also interested in what my listeners from other countries like. If you have any questions or suggestions about any sake topic, just drop me a line. My email address is alex@sugidama.co.uk, or you can tag me on Instagram @sugidamablog in one word, or on Mastodon @sugidamablog@universeodon.com. Again, if you like the episode and want more, hit the subscribe button, and you will get every new episode downloaded to your player as soon as it's out. If you would like to give me a bit of support, please leave a review or rate Sugidama Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podchaser, or anywhere you can do it. But more importantly, please share this podcast with your friends on your social media, chat apps, anywhere. The more new people start listening to Sugidama Podcast, the more actively the podcasting platforms start recommending it to other listeners. So it's the best way to bring new people to the world of sake. Thanks a lot for listening. Kampai.
Suge, 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 Sugidama blog. Suge, 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 Sugidama blog.